My name is Justin, and I'm an addict. I've been actively working the steps in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013, and am grateful to be sober one day at a time, thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts. RECO12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions with such variety as alcoholism, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, just to name a few. Normally, each Friday at noon Central Time, we hold a live lunch hour speaker meeting with a recovering addict from anywhere on earth, pertaining to any or no faith tradition and with any background, who shares their experience, strength, and hope on a specified recovery topic of their choice. Today, we're obviously recording on Wednesday instead of our normal Friday, and it's for good reason. And we'll get back to Fridays next week. But for the 12-week period that we started on March 4th of 2022 through May 20th, we're focusing on each of the 12 steps of recovery. Our speaker today will share for 20 to 25 minutes on his experience with step 9, and then the live audience gets the opportunity to ask questions of him for another 20 to 25 minutes. To get weekly invitations to join us in these meetings, please go to reco12.com/forward/join us. That's RECO12.com, and submit your email address there to get the reminders and links. Donations and podcast ratings and reviews are greatly appreciated, and details on doing that will be in the chat of the live meeting and also in the show notes of the podcast. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, a quick disclaimer. While we hope that these episodes will be helpful to both sponsors and sponsees alike, these 12 weeks of episodes are not intended to replace the necessity of working with a sponsor through the steps. We will not be working the steps in these meetings. They are meant only to be a supplement and informative reference on what the steps mean and why they are important to the individual speaking about them. Now, step 9 reads, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Now, here's a little bit about our guest speaker, Daniel T. Daniel T. is sober in his primary program since December 16th of 2016. A true addict, Daniel is addicted to anything that is possible to be addicted to, often cross-addicting several times a day in active addiction. Some of his top plates include sex, relationships, marijuana, cocaine, workaholism, gambling, codependency, and a healthy dose of anonism, alongside with what he calls anonanonism, which is being an anon to anons. Daniel has taken recovery very seriously after taking his addiction seriously for many years, working the steps several times with different focuses and being heavily involved in sponsorship and service at multiple levels of the service structure. Take it away, Daniel. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me today, Justin. And more importantly, thank you for changing your schedule for me. I know you've been trying to pull me in on a Friday, and the time differences have just been impossible. And so I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate the hard work that you put into this podcast. As someone who also has played around with my own little podcast, I appreciate the hard work that goes into this, and it's inspiring. And actually, you inspired me to start my podcast. So thank you. And I apologize in advance because I have a gruffy voice and I'm overtired. So apologize in advance for wherever my brain might take me. So thank you very much for the intro. Put as much work into my addictions as I've put into my recovery. Probably put more work into my addictions than I did into my recovery, because that was 24/7. I guess it's not a competition to qualify for as many anonymous programs as possible, but I really, I'm just a real addict. There's no, it doesn't really make a difference what it is that I'll use to addict to and to addict with. The need to escape self was very strong from a very early age through an early trauma, and the result was, I guess, sometimes fun, sometimes painful. It's like anything, that we drink because we like to drink. I do currently drink alcohol, not too much to excess, although sometimes a little bit. But I am whiskey free for about 7 or 8 years. So I was able to isolate whiskey from my problem drugs. I am sober from Candy Crush for about 5 months now. So I'm really proud of that. Yeah. So, it is what it is. From my primary program is SA, where I found a big book solution to sexual addiction. It was about 5 months after that. About 7 months after I joined that I got free from marijuana, which was my second primary drug. And I was always medicated on marijuana. Marijuana was constant. It was an absolute constant, regardless of what else I was doing. Those were really my two primary ones. And underneath that is the relationship and the dependency and the love addiction, and the codependency, which basically flared up like a crazy monster once I got sober from my primary addictions, which I think is a lot of people's experience. And so I've spent a lot of time in the past 5+ years of my recovery working on that side, which is really emotional sobriety, because once we get physical sobriety, the aim is to have emotional sobriety, is to be emotionally sober, which I think is actually, one of the main reasons why I stay, because I don't think that emotional sobriety and spiritual sobriety and mental sobriety have anything of an end point. They are growth oriented. I guess physical sobriety is the starting point, is the basis. But as an out of that, we grow. One of the things that I call addiction, one of the things that I call recovery is growing up. Basically, that's it. And when I came into recovery, my emotional age was about 3.5 to 4. I was unable to feel any feelings. So I've grown a little bit, and I think that real life growing up happens on a spiritual basis, which is literally one day at a time. So I do not consider myself emotionally that much older than 8-9 years old, even though I have some moments of being a 5-year-old and some moments of being a 20-year-old. So again, attaining any form whatsoever of emotional sobriety, which is the ultimate goal, I guess, because we're not here to be monks. We're not here to be spiritual gurus. We're here to have our feet firmly planted on the ground, and our heads in focus with the higher power. But I guess that the ultimate way that I found, which isn't going to be a surprise to you, was the steps. And I had to work them the first year of my recovery 3 times over. And then I'm very grateful to say that I've been focusing since then on sponsoring. I've worked the steps one more time, and I am procrastinating at the moment in terms of working them again, which would be for the 5th time. But it would be in line with working the steps at least once a year, although I really crammed it in. For me, recovery, the only way that I was able to recover, because I am such a hopeless addict, was to give recovery absolute full-time attention in my first year. I had no choice, nothing else. I wouldn't have been able to get even close to recovery without that real deep focus on shutting down everything outside of just focusing on recovery. And it was difficult. And, the emotional spirals, the obsessive thinking, the insane, the little incident that would send me spiraling, the roller coaster that I found myself on has pretty much largely gone away today. And that is an absolute miracle. And I live in gratitude. I try to live in gratitude. I could do a lot better. Like I say, I'm still very young. So I give myself actually a bit of an easy time. I don't work I don't work a crazy big book program in terms of step 10 writing or step 11 meditating. I see myself still as a bit of a baby, and one day at a time. I'm just trying to grow in spirituality, and so the focus of today's meeting is step 9, which means that I should spend some time focusing on step 9, and I think that for me, obviously, the build up to step 9 with step 8, people. For me, step 8, the first few times that I did it was really very simple. It was just a list, and then the last time that I was taken through the steps, it was a lot more involved, because I had to actually identify what the harm was, and what the recourse was. What should I have done? And it was a little bit like the step 4 in terms of no fanciful thinking, no magical thinking. What was the actual harm? And so, getting to that point, which I think it's an important point to note, I think that for how I understand step 9, there's three. There's the essence of step 9. The essence of step 9 at the core of it is that I have made harm. I have harmed people around me. I've stolen from people around me, and I have disrupted what we can call the balance of the universe, the karma of the world. And that disturbance has created a disturbance in me. And in the theme of the steps, which is to unblock everything that is standing in between the way of me and my higher power, step 9 is the pinnacle of that unblocking, because what it does is it allows me to get a freedom from that block, which has been created through my disrupting the natural balance of the universe and the internal turmoil that is created through the constant existence of being alive within that disturbance that I've created. And that is really the spirit of step 9. It's the freedom that I get. My sponsor calls it the freedom steps, and the freedom step. And as I make each amends, I get more freedom. When listening to a lot of a lot of the circuit speakers that spoke around the Mark H group of AA, of AA, I'm not going to call them fundamentalists, but of the way that they work the steps, they really pointed out that for them, only when all amends were made did they really truly find that freedom. And an absolute disclosure, I have not made all of my amends, because a lot of my amends, I don't know, there's no actual true recourse. It's from bad business dealings or from stealing things from cars when I was a kid, things that sit still in my consciousness, in my conscience. And my last sponsor pointed out to me that I have to consider with my higher power what it is that I can do in the universe to rebalance that, to fix that balance. And that's a meditation a process that I'm involved in my recovery. And of course, there is no real true amends to the people that I've really, truly hurt. The reality is that I hurt my wife emotionally, mentally, and physically, and spiritually for 17 years of active addiction. Now going to her and saying, this is what I did. I want to make amends for it. Is there anything else you want to add? It doesn't just fix it magically. There's this concept called living amends, which is really what recovery is. Recovery is about living in that amends. That means becoming a better father, becoming a better husband one day at a time. There's no end goal. So then there's the mechanics of the actual step 9. What is step 9? What types of amends are there? There's not every wrong that I've done needs what we would call a big book, fully blown amends. Some things are adequate to make an apology. A change of behavior is very often an amends. Sometimes we have to just write a letter because the person is either not willing to see us or dead. And of course, financial amends. So those are the different types of amends. And then we have the format. How do I make that amends? So I was taught by my last sponsor who took me through the steps that, we don't just go and run to the person and make the amends. We prepare them first. We tell them why we're going to see them. We do that genuinely in a written way. There's the right way of doing things, letting them know I want to make amends for behavior that I did previously. When would be a good time to do that? And if I don't hear from you, then within a couple of weeks, then I'll write you a letter. So that gives them the opportunity. And then if they do come back, obviously, the point is, and this is, I think, pretty much accepted in most sponsorship lineages, that generally we don't do the amends in a bubble. We prepare what we're going to say beforehand. We go over it with our sponsor, just like we go over step 8 with our sponsor, because very often when we think that we are meant to, because my thinking is broken. So if I think that I have to fix something, it might turn out to be non-amends at all. I need to go. And that's why also, as I mentioned before, actually going deeper into step 8 and seeing what was the actual harm from an objective point of view is very helpful with that. Because I myself will start to visualize that and see that actually I don't need to make an amends for that. There was no actual harm done. It's that's a change of behavior type of amends. And so
stress and trauma happen inside of the body, which means we can heal them through the body. My name is Luis Mojica. I'm a somatic therapist, nutritionist, and host of the Holistic Life Navigation podcast. Join me each week as I teach you how to release stress and trauma through listening to your body, using nutrition, somatic experiencing, and other holistic practices. You can listen at the Holistic Life Navigation podcast or at holisticlifenavigation.com.
Once they've responded, then we've got the format together. Then we've got the actual, the big book format of the amends, which is basically the steps as outlined in the big book, which is that I am going to, first of all, tell them that I'm working a program of recovery of sorts. I don't have to go into details. I don't have to mention it's a spiritual program or God, but if it's helpful, I can. And then there is the 2 schools of thought out there. There's the school of thought which says that I go into detail into the harm that I took and that I made. And there is a school of thought that says that I don't need to go into detail into the harm. I can be more general. I'm grateful to say that my lineage of sponsorship is the latter, and we don't go into too much detail. At that stage, in the amends, we then admit that we shouldn't have done this. This was wrong. I want to ask for forgiveness. This was behavior that was incorrect. I shouldn't have done that. Obviously, this is an actual harm that I've done to someone. If they know that I've been thinking negatively about them, then I'll tell them, there's a misconception that every single resentment that I have, I need to make an amends for. That is not actually the case from how I understand the big book and how I've been taught it. If they know about it, and if I've gone and gossiped about them, then for sure I would need to make an amend. And then, of course, asking for forgiveness. And then the final point is asking if they would have anything that they would like to bring up on top of that, if they would like to bring anything else. So, in my own experience, the first time round that I did step 9, it was there was a lot of freedom that I gained. My sponsor immediately said, now you've got to live the amends. So he immediately pushed me onto living amends, which was really important for me because that put me onto a trajectory of recovery, which was really important. but it was amazing what came out. When I made an amends to my mother, the pain from her side that came out of harm that she felt that she'd done to me, which was just completely crazy. And I spent hours of therapy on that subsequently. And the amends to my wife, which was, even though, like I said, it has nothing compared to being living amends, but actually sitting there face to face and saying that, I harmed you, I treated you badly, and this was wrong, and I did it for a long time, and actually owning up. And in that case, it was important to go into quite a bit of detail with my wife, because otherwise it's not really real. It's not, there's no real showing of any knowledge of what I'm doing. And there was certain financial amends which had been sitting on my conscience for a long time. Money that I had stolen from the school. I was helping run the school candy shop every day, and every couple of quid that went into the cash register, another pound would go into my pocket. And of course, that would be used for my gambling addiction mainly. I guess I probably, I think I poker chipped most of that away. Yeah. I wonder where I got money for marijuana in that case. I never thought about that. But yeah, finding out a way to send what I thought would be enough to cover that debt to the school was a whole story. It took me a couple of years. And then finally, I worked out there was a charity fund that the school had created. And then 3 months later, they emailed me saying, "Oh, thank you so much for your donation." And that was when I got the freedom, because that was when I responded, this was not a donation. This was money that I had stolen from the school. And this is my amends and my recovery. And I didn't even get a reply. Who needs a reply? I got my freedom because that's the honesty. For some reason, the clock is going really slowly, and I feel like I've said a lot. It's insane. Normally, it goes the other way around. So I'm gonna really wrap up because I think I've gone through a lot, and maybe there are questions, or maybe we can just sit in silent meditation for several minutes at the end, or whatever it is. But I think ultimately, once I've cleared that path and gone through my step 9, really it's what we say in meetings. I'm currently living in trying to live in steps 10, 11, and 12. And it's that 10, it's the magic. I know that this is obviously something that you're going to approach next week, but it's the magic of making an amends promptly. That promptly is so magical because there's no build-up. It's immediate. And it's completely on my side of the street. It's got nothing to do with anybody else's side of the street. It has nothing to do with whatever anyone else has done. What did I do? Own it, move on. So magical. And and I guess the only part that I didn't mention was unless it's going to cause harm to others. And obviously that's a very important part. And that means really at the core of it, it means that I go and I check with other people that might be involved in that amends to see if it's okay if I make that amends before I go ahead and make that amends. Or that's why we need sponsorship ultimately, because I can't do this alone. Sometimes it is warranted for a person to turn themselves into a police station, and sometimes it isn't. But are we willing to go to any lengths? That's the real key. And it's okay to split the list into parts that I'm willing to make now and parts that I'm willing to make later. But ultimately, as the freedom comes, I guess we see that anything we weren't willing to do now, we're willing to do just to get more freedom. So on that note, thank you very much for inviting me again, and I'll pass back to you, Justin.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. I really appreciate your share. All right. So a reminder to our live audience, if you have questions for Daniel, please type them in the Q&A link there at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those as we go along. And I've also written down a few questions here for you, Daniel, as you shared. First question comes in from the live audience. from Kimberly, and she said she asks about your share of being emotionally immature. Starting off in recovery at about the age of 3 emotionally, and slowly growing up from that. Tell us a little bit about a little bit more about that and how you are able to function in life being emotionally immature, which I am too, by the way. So go ahead.
Well, actually, the 12 and 12 says that addicts as a whole are emotionally immature and sensitive and childish. It's something that categorizes all of us. My story was very clear. My emotional growth was stunted through tragedy at the age of 3.5. And so I can pinpoint to just over 3, actually, just to that point, that my emotional growth was then stopped. I didn't know what feelings were. Through recovery, I've come to realize, through my amends process, I've come to realize that actually I didn't have a chance before then, that the trauma that happened to me as a child between the age of 0 to 3 was very tangible, and didn't give me a chance to even have something blocked. I wasn't that talented that I was able to just block the emotions. It was blocked for me basically through the experiences that God decided to give me to then pass on to others. So how have I been able to, obviously, sometimes definitely my wife laughs once in a while at this one, because obviously, in many ways, I'm obviously a 46-year-old adult man running businesses and, like many addicts, very capable and talented with my own talents. So there's obviously 2 sides to that. But I think the more important part is the second part of the question, which is really what I mentioned about how spiritual growth happens one day at a time. You can't speed up spiritual growth. And I think that's the same for emotional growth. So again, in the early part of my recovery, in therapy, my therapist would ask me, what are you feeling right now? And I would say, nothing. Nothing. What do you mean? What is a feeling? And through the process of recovery, I've been able to be more in touch with that standard rote of 4 or 5 emotions that I feel as a human being. And that's been helpful for me. And I am growing one day at a time. This is the process. That's how I see it. That's how I understand it. I can't rush recovery. Many addicts come into recovery and that's it. They want to either become old timers, I relate to that, or they want to recover quickly and move on, whatever it is. That's addiction. It's the opposite of recovery, of spiritual growth, which only happens one day at a time.
Thank you for sharing that, Daniel. And I want to dig a little bit on something you shared there. And it's gone. So apparently I don't want to dig there. So let's move on to the next question. This comes in from an anonymous attendee, and I actually wrote down something similar to this. And what this anonymous attendee asks is, have you found that you have had to make the same amends with the same people over and over again? And if so, do you approach each time differently? And how do you stay on track if they don't believe you?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I was shown in the last time that I was taken through the steps that we only work the steps on the period since the time prior to the time that we work the steps. So while I have made an amends to my wife, for example, every time that I've gone through the steps, they have not been the same amends. And especially this previous time that I took the steps about a year and a half ago, it was only for stuff that I had done prior to that last amends. So gratefully to say, most of the stuff in my previous amends was not brought up. So there is no real need to go and make an amends to someone unless over the same stuff. And again, that's something I didn't mention in my talk, was that the amends are for us; they're not for the other person. So unfortunately, it's sad if they don't forgive us. There should still be a freedom, because I've made my amends. I've cleaned up my side of the street. And it's an important point to make. I haven't experienced that. I'm grateful to say that all my amends have been accepted. So I don't have any experience with that. But that's not something that we should need to do. Something, it's like making a fourth step over the same resentment over and over again. Why would we do that? Something's broken in the fourth step that we have to look at, that we haven't been able to overcome that particular resentment, whatever it is. And like the big book says, maybe we need to pray on it for a while. But thanks.
Thank you, Daniel. All right. Next question comes in from Cade from our live audience. Cade says, "Hey, Daniel, it can be very scary to take that first step toward recovery, attending a meeting, telling someone you want help, etc. How can someone be less afraid of starting?" Great question, Cade.
A higher consumption of vegetables may cut your odds of developing depression by as much as 62%. An American Cancer Society study found that women who sit for more than 6 hours a day have a 40% higher death rate. Hi, my name is Maya Acosta, and I'm a health and wellness educator and host of the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast. Join me and the amazing people that I get to talk to as I set out to learn how to improve our quality of life and increase our longevity. You can listen at the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast or at healthylifestylesolutions.org.
It's a theme that came up in one of the WhatsApp groups I'm in the other day. We don't take the first step when we work the steps. If we really come into recovery, the first step took us when we walked into the rooms on the first day. That doesn't mean we don't have to work the first step, because the first step is something we have to really, we have to internalize. It's a total and absolute admission of my powerlessness over everything, over me, and over my actions, and the unmanageability that happens when I'm trying to run my life. But to be in fear of beginning recovery, I think it's exciting. I mean, in my first year, I was just excited the whole time. I was on the pink cloud. I think that's what the pink cloud is. If you're really working recovery, then you're on a pink cloud at the beginning. Don't get confused by the pink cloud. It does not last forever. It's not real. But if there's a fear that's going on here that's deeper, then something's missing in my first step. Or I'll get to it in my fourth step, and I just got to keep on plodding. But the key is to work the steps, because that's where the freedom comes.
Thank you so much. All right. Another question from the live audience. This is from Anna. Anna says, "Wow, thanks. I'm not up to that step and dread it as much, if not more than the fourth step. How do you kill the ego that does not want to do this? Also, how do you figure out who or what is worthy of an amend? If the relationship is no longer or in a peaceful place, should we revive it with an amend?"
Thank you. Again, that's what I said before in terms of the second part of the question, which is we do it with sponsorship. We do not make amends alone. We can't, because going in and reigniting it, especially if I'm a love addict and I go to an old qualifier and try and make amends for the stuff that I've done. Meanwhile, I'm married. It's like not necessarily the right thing. In that case, maybe a letter would be better. And that's what good sponsorship is about. In terms of getting the courage to make the amends, I think that that comes with the steps. When I get through step 9, I'm ready to make those amends. And yes, it does take courage. Of course, it takes courage. But I get more courage as a result of those steps, as a result of seeing that I'm near the end, that I'm coming to a place where I'm gonna, I can already touch and taste that freedom a little bit. And for me, I think my experience was that I didn't dread it as much as I wanted to get past it, which also isn't such a healthy attitude. But ultimately, we get there.
Thank you, Daniel. All right. Another question from our live audience. Matt says, "Can you please speak on the difference between apologizing, saying I'm sorry, versus making amends and owning what we've done?"
Yeah. I mean, ultimately speaking, an apology is something, I said something rude to someone. I was rude to them. I have this memory 17 years ago, or whatever it is, 22 years ago in college, of this guy that I, snubbed in front of all of our friends while we were at the bar, whatever it was. And that's it. It's not a major deal. I didn't create a major disturbance in the planet, but that little comment that I said and that look on his face sticks in my brain. I'm completely pulling this example out of my head, by the way. This isn't a real example. It sits and it sticks in my brain. And I think that that's not necessarily a fully blown amends where I've caused a rift, where I've created a real damage in a relationship, or I've really spiritually hurt someone. Why? Because the chances are that person probably doesn't remember it. They've moved on from it. And that's where an apology is pretty much, good enough, I think. Whereas an amends is where I've really caused a harm. Again, that's where good sponsorship will come in to help me to see the difference. And I'll sit with my sponsees and I'll say, yeah, okay, that's an apology, that's an amend, and we'll go through each one like that.
Yeah, thank you. So earlier in your share today, you talked about the desperation of needing to get in to these meetings and you talked about your first year of recovery being basically devoted 100% to recovery, working the steps 3 times and putting pretty much everything else on hold. And in the big book, that's related to or referred to as being the desperation of a drowning man. Right before this podcast, I took a call from somebody and his share was, man, I just don't know that I want to devote as much time to this as what it looks like I need to do. What is your advice to somebody who is just walking into the rooms of recovery and the importance of approaching it with that desperation?
I don't think we can create desperation. And I think that a lot of people nowadays come into recovery in earlier stages of the addictive cycle. And so it's a longer process for them. And, everyone's story is different. I really don't think that I can do anything. I would say I'm more powerless over your addictions than I am over my own addictions, which is kind of my anonism, right? My anonanonism as well, because I really want to fix your addictions, and then I want to fix your powerlessness over my addictions. I want to fix it all, and the answer is that there is nothing I can do. So I'm a very easy-going sponsor in that sense. Like, I'll be available. If they call me, I'll respond. If they don't, I won't reach out to them. I'll let them go. And then if they call me 3 months later, no problem. Wherever we were, I'll carry on. I have no problem with that because they haven't got the desperation yet. They're going to come back to me each time, very likely after some event that's hurting and painful. And not everyone, the gift of desperation, which is God, okay, it is a gift. But I had to pay a heavy price for my gift of desperation. So, I see a lot of people come into the rooms with younger and with less desperation. And it's always nice to see them take their recovery really seriously. And it's okay if they don't, because they're either not ready yet or they're just not advanced enough. And each person has their own story.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I hear the concept with a lot of newcomers coming in who maybe are quote unquote high bottom drunks. I hear some of the old timers talk about, well, you have a choice to bring your bottom up and not go as deep as maybe I have. What is your, and I think you touched on this here, but I'd like to dig a little bit more on the bringing one's bottom up. Do you believe that one can bring one's bottom up and not maybe go to the depths of some of the others that we interact with in these rooms?
I first came in the rooms in 2001, and I left them in 2001 and went back into active addiction until 2016. I can't answer if someone would have given me a message about raising my bottom, if it would have worked or not. I know that I wasn't ready, and I know that I didn't want it. I needed it. But the big book says it all the time. Needing it isn't enough. You have to want it. And then you have to work it for it to actually work. So wanting it is the starting point. Can my experience help others? I guess the big book says it can, but can it bring someone else's bottom up? I don't know. It depends on the person. Again, I don't know if that right exact message said by the right person would have had any effect on me long term. Maybe it would have. I've heard other stories that people walked into different rooms. The room that I walked in was very new and didn't have sobriety in it. So would I have walked into a different room with a lot of sobriety and had a different experience? Maybe. I've heard people's stories that they did. It wasn't my experience. So I don't know.
No, I appreciate that. And I have the same thoughts on that. Just I love getting different angles and perspectives on it. All right. A reminder to our live audience, if you have questions, type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. We do have another question from our live audience from CB. CB asks, if making an amend can hurt someone else, should I not make the amend and just pray on it? So I think that's answered in this step 9 phrase, but tell us a little bit about your experience with that.
So I don't have any direct experience with it, I don't think. And I only have what I've been taught, which is that I can't hurt anyone else in my amends because I'm creating more harm. How could I fix the balance of the universe if I'm disrupting it more? It's simple. It's just an algorithm, right? I mean, that's what the steps are. They're just basically an algorithm to get right with myself and with God and with you. And I can't get right if I'm creating wrongs. So I don't have any personal experience with it.
Yeah, thank you. My personal experience with that, and I'll share that real quick, is if making amends with somebody is going to cause more harm than good, like what it says, except if it's going to harm them or someone else, I need to, like, and you referred to this, spend some time with my higher power. How can I, balance things in the universe? How can I make things right? And for me, I call those living amends, or where I am committing to live my life in a different manner. And hopefully those different actions, those different ways can do something to tip the scales in one way or another. Not that the scales are what get me where I need to be, but I do need to make things right and find that peace. And if every time I look back and think about that person or that situation and I lose my peace and serenity, I really need to address things in that. So that's my take on that. All right. We have another question from Kimberly. Where did you learn the knowledge about the balance of the universe? What's your take on that? That's an interesting question.
Okay. So like most things in recovery, we think we came up with it, and then we read it somewhere and we realize, oh, that's not something I came up with. And nothing that I came up with today is anything that I came up with originally. So my previous sponsor who took me through the steps is someone called Tim M from the UK. And he has an amazing program in AA. He's 28 years sober in AA and 25 years in Al-Anon. And he has a blog, which is, I'll direct you to it. It's First 164. That's FIRST 164.blogspot.com. That's first164.blogspot.com. And he updates that blog between 5 and 15 times a week with active thoughts and active recovery depths as he's working with multiple sponsees and as he's growing in his recovery. And he took me through the steps the last time that I went through the steps, and it was incredibly transformative for me. He has an amazing lineage, which does go via Mark H. through that road of recovery. And that's just the words that he told me when I got to step 9. And we came to those different things in step 8 that were on my list, that there was no immediate amends to make. There was no immediate answer. So yeah, that's a plug for Tim.
Yeah, thank you. I will share that link in the show notes of the podcast, which will be live on pretty much every podcast platform within about 2 hours, 3 hours after we close this meeting. A question from another anonymous attendee, and I'm going to reword this. The question is, am I included in others? But what I want to ask you is, what does amends with self look like to you? Is that something that's important or powerful in your opinion?
Yes, I think it is. And it is something that I didn't mention. I think there's different takes on this. But living amends is an amends to myself. Living in my addiction, while it can be really fuzzy and warm, in that cesspool of whatever addiction it is that I'm snorting or covering myself in, it's not really reality. I'm not really present. I'm not really spiritual. I'm actually the opposite. I'm basically living dead. I'm walking dead. I'm alive, but my eyes are closed, even though my eyes are actually open. That's not life. And taking the steps, getting into recovery, I remember saying early on in my recovery, this is the first time I've ever invested in myself. And it was a very paradoxical statement once I thought about it, because I'd invested millions in my addiction. Wasn't that an investment in myself? I'd invested thousands of hours in my workaholism. Wasn't that an investment in my future? But it wasn't. And the first time that I was ready to invest in myself was the time that I was able to actually come into recovery. And that was the beginnings of living amends. And that recovery is a living amends to myself. That's what I said just now before. It's about writing the relationship between me and myself, me and you, and me and God. So I'm right there in all 3 parts, still in the center, and pushing myself away from the center and putting God back in the center. That's what we have to do every single day. Take ourselves out of the center, put God back into the center.
Love it. And that's a battle that I fight with myself all the time too. Am I trying to kick God off his throne here and sit in it myself and make myself God? No, that doesn't work. All right. We got another question from our live audience, and then we'll start wrapping things up after this. You mentioned amends for gossiping. Now I want to ask you, would in that case, would you make amends to the person you're gossiping about, or the amends to the person that you gossip to about that person? And how would that, if making amends with the person you gossip about, how would that not make things cause more harm?
Again, there's no true answer. It's so situational. It's so, that's why we do the step 8 the way that we should do the step 8, which is analyze the entire situation and look at it from objective angles. Who was harmed and how? Now, if both people were harmed as a result of it, then I need to make amends to both of them. If only one of them was harmed, the other person never found out about it, maybe I don't need to make an amends to them. Maybe it'll harm them more. Sponsorship and good step 8 work. That's the answer.
I agree. So important to have a sponsor and go over these things before making those amends. Very good. All right. So before we close up, do you have any final parting words of wisdom for us, Daniel, that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, keep coming back, because it works if you work it. And if you work, and you're worth it. You're worth it. If you work it, you're worth it. It works. But you got to keep coming back. And now I'm showing my tiredness. And yeah, gratitude. That's the parting word for today. Just to be grateful to be sober, grateful to be invited to this, grateful to be alive, grateful to have a higher power who loves me and brought me to recovery. Grateful for the people that came and stayed and came in and left, and grateful for my family, and grateful for my sponsor. Thank you. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Daniel. That was a good, very good, great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your questions, or if you have other questions, please go to RECO12.com/forum and join in our community there and ask those questions and answer others' questions that may come up. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you've not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It's a great way for us to work our step 12 in sharing this message with others. Next week, we'll be back to Friday meetings, and we will be covering step 10. And David A. will be our guest speaker, and he's excited to share his step 10 experience, strength, and hope. And I've had several step 10 calls with David A. He does it great. He does a great walkthrough of those. I'm excited to have him here next week. I look forward to seeing y'all back here next week. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the third step prayer that Daniel will lead us in.
Thanks. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, the victory over them may bear witness to those I may help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Keep coming back, everybody. Come trudge this happy road with me. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and binded with the seal